In a recent video here on the channel, we looked at why dragons do not appear in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and whether Smaug was, in fact, the last of his kind. However, some viewers pointed out that maybe I should rewatch the trilogy and pay closer attention to the mounts of the Nazgûl, which, according to them, were wyverns. That made me realize that the films never make it entirely clear what the fell beasts actually are. So what were these creatures? Were they really wyverns, drakes, or some kind of lesser dragon? Let's take a closer look at what Tolkien actually wrote about them. The winged beasts were not wyverns, drakes, or any kind of dragon. In simple terms, they can best be described as something closer to gigantic vultures. More importantly, their existence was not natural, but the result of Sauron's sorcery, as we will see shortly. The artwork you're seeing on screen represents a version that is far more faithful to Tolkien's descriptions. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy Peter Jackson's version. It is genuinely terrifying and, in my opinion, fits very well with the aura of intimidation surrounding the Nazgûl. Visually, though, the film version looks much closer to wyverns than to what the books describe. See for yourselves, from The Return of the King. The great shadow descended like a falling cloud, and behold, it was a winged creature. If bird, then greater than all other birds. And it was naked, and neither quill nor feather did it bear. And its vast pinions were as webs of hide between horned fingers. And it stank. Now, to better understand the origin of these creatures, it's important to remember who Sauron was in relation to his master. Sauron was not a Vala like Morgoth, but a Maya. A powerful spirit, of course, but one that existed on a lower tier of the cosmic hierarchy. Because Morgoth stood higher on that scale of power, he was capable of far more drastic transformations. Through his sub-creative powers, Morgoth could corrupt creatures using part of his own essence. It was a deep and possible irreversible process, capable of turning living beings into something entirely different from what they once were. That is how dragons came into existence, for example. Sauron, on the other hand, though immensely terrible, did not possess that same level of raw power. He did not create creatures of that magnitude, nor deform them directly from his own being in the way Morgoth did. Instead, Sauron worked differently. He took creatures that already existed, ancient and resilient ones, and corrupted them slowly, feeding them, increasing their size, and shaping their behavior toward evil. This was not absolute creation, but manipulation and distortion. It is precisely within this context that the fell beasts emerged. They are not lesser dragons, nor failed attempts at something greater. They represent the maximum result Sauron could achieve while working within his own limitations. This explains why these creatures are so terrifying, yet still inferior to Morgoth's dragons. They occupy an intermediate place, more than mere animals, yet below the great monstrosities shaped by a Vala. Let's now look at how Tolkien describes this process in The Return of the King, quote, "A creature of an older world maybe it was, whose kind, lingering in forgotten mountains cold beneath the moon, outstayed their day, and in hideous eyrie bred this last untimely brood, apt to evil. And the Dark Lord took it and nursed it with fell meats until it grew beyond the measure of all other things that fly, and gave it to his servant to be his steed." The first appearance of one of these creatures occurs after Gandalf's fall into the abyss of Moria. After leaving the realm of Galadriel and continuing their journey, as the company crossed the river, they were attacked by a Nazgûl mounted on a winged beast. Here is how Tolkien describes the scene in The Fellowship of the Ring. Legolas laid down his paddle and took up the bow that he had brought from Lorien. Then he sprang ashore and climbed a few paces up the bank. Stringing the bow and fitting an arrow, he turned, peering back over the river into the darkness. Across the water there were shrill cries, but nothing could be seen. Frodo looked up at the elf standing tall above him, as he gazed into the night, seeking a mark to shoot at. Now rising and sailing up from the south, the great clouds advanced, sending out dark outriders into the starry fields. A sudden dread fell on the company. "Elbereth Gilthoniel," sighed Legolas as he looked up. Even as he did so, a dark shape, like a cloud and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly, came out of the blackness in the south, and sped towards the company, blotting out all light as it approached. Soon it appeared as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits in the night. Fierce voices rose up to greet it from across the water. Frodo felt a sudden chill running through him and clutching at his heart. There was a deadly cold, like the memory of an old wound, in his shoulder. He crouched down as if to hide. Suddenly the great bow of Lorien sang. Shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up. Almost above him the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore. The sky was clean again. There was a tumult of many voices far away, cursing and wailing in the darkness. And then, silence. It is worth noting that Legolas himself believed he had slain the Nazgûl. However, in the Two Towers, Gandalf later explains that he had indeed struck true and brought down the Ringwraiths' mount, though the rider himself survived. Quote, "The winged messenger!" cried Legolas. "I shot at him with the bow of Galadriel above Sarn Gabir, and I felled him from the sky. He filled us all with fear. What new terror is this?" "One that you cannot slay with arrows," said Gandalf. "You only slew his steed. It was a good deed, but the rider was soon horsed again. For he was a Nazgûl, one of the 9, who ride now upon winged steeds. Soon their terror will overshadow the last armies of our friends, cutting off the sun. But they have not yet been allowed to cross the river, and Saruman does not know of this new shape in which the Ringwraiths have been clad." As we saw, Gandalf acknowledges it as a great deed, and in my view it goes beyond that. Not just a great deed, but the greatest feat Legolas accomplishes in the books. In the movies, Legolas's most iconic moment is the Mumakil scene where he single-handedly takes down an entire enemy force along with the beast itself, finishing with a very stylish dismount. This scene, however, exists only in the films. It does not appear in the books. On the other hand, while Legolas doesn't surf a Mumakil in the original work, bringing down a Nazgûl in complete darkness while the rest of the company could barely see a hand in front of their faces is still truly remarkable. Especially when we consider Frodo's reaction. When he feels the sudden pain return in his wounded shoulder, it strongly suggests that this was no lesser Ringwraith, but the Witch King himself, riding upon that winged beast. But returning to the fell beasts themselves, Sauron's intention was clear: to combine useful traits into a single creature. On one hand, the immense mobility of a flying mount. On the other, an appearance capable of reflecting the terror of the Ringwraith who rode upon it. From that perspective, both the book description and the film adaptation succeed remarkably well. But all things considered, I have to ask, which of the two designs do you prefer? Let me know in the comments below. I'm always reading your comments and often base future videos on what you bring up there. If you like this kind of video, consider subscribing and leaving a like for more. It really helps small channels like this. Take care and see you in the next one.